Hello, everybody. My name is Pete Doctor. I'm the director of the film.
And I'm Bob Peterson, the co-director.
The origins of this film, it's actually a question we get asked a lot because it's such a bizarre kind of premise that people are like, okay, how did this idea actually come up first? And, I don't really remember all the details, but...
just to sort of get us kick-started onto the idea of old men was that drawing that you did of an old man with these happy balloons, just like cranky old guy with the happiest balloons in the world. That got us started talking about it. And just, I think we were both struck by how old people are so cool, and they have so many great stories, and it just seemed ripe to do a story about a senior citizen,
And then also the idea of just getting away from everything.
Right.
There are days when you're just overwhelmed by people and interaction and social awkwardness, and for me, growing up as a geeky kid, I liked the idea of escaping to my room, and so the idea of escaping the world was something that I think the floating house kind of grew out of that.
Mm-hmm. This newsreel, we were really inspired by movies like King Kong and just some of the music, the score of that, and the look of those black and white adventure movies.
Yeah, we looked at a lot of newsreels from 30s, 40s, and 50s, and in fact, the projectionist here, John Hazelton, really filled us in on a lot of the artifacts you'd likely see from different time periods, and I think the lighting guys did an amazing job of capturing the texture of film.
Yes, how smeary it is great.
Yeah, the blur, and we looked at different newsreels where film stock wouldn't match up. The stuff they shot out on the field is a little more faded than the stuff that when they were back in New York,
It's hilarious how the score just kind of jumps around, too, just like these slam cuts.
Well, yeah, we purposely played around with just bad edits, because that's the way we recorded it, too, at Giacchino. Unconnected to picture, heroic adventure, mystery, intrigue, drama,
romance.
Put it all together.
A little bit of trivia: the stage where he reveals the Monster Paradise Falls is the Presto Theater, correct? Yeah.
And then another little bit of trivia: there's the scene where Muntz is saying, "I will not come back until I do." That sea of hats is actually nothing but hats. There's no people under them.
He must have thought that looked pretty weird from his angle.
That would be a good extra, is to see what it looks like from his point of view. This is something that Ronnie Del Carmen, who's the head of story, contributed a lot. He had this great idea of these transitions and this to me feels like what it's like when you're so caught up with something. Young Carl is watching the newsreel, and without him moving at all, the world changes, and it's just he's in his own head, and that's what it feels like. And we did that visually, transition to him now pretending to be Muntz himself.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see that elsewhere through the rest of the film.
Talk about the title, Up.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's see. Up as a title came about because it seemed very enigmatic and interesting and didn't tell you too much, but it was intriguing. It was the direction Carl wanted to go, but what he really needed to do is kind of come down to earth and reconnect with people.
Yeah, it has a sense of hope to it, too,
Yep.
It's fun to see this house, just how, how falling apart it is, from when they fix it up later. It's just so grungy.
Yeah, and we built it first for Carl, like what it looks like later in the film. And then we made a squeaky clean version for when they first get married, and a really rat-tattered, torn up place. Then that's what we use here.
Originally, she, in this house, she didn't have any kind of gear. I remember we, at some point, had the idea that maybe some of the things she's using to steer sort of point at what Carl does later when he steers the house and actually lifts off.
And it's the same location in the house. So where he ends up setting up the coffee grinder is right there where she's doing the bike, and the rope works the chicken off top of the house, exactly like he does later. The scene where Ellie takes the helmet off and her hair sticks up was boarded, and it's, of course, easy to draw. But when it comes to the actual effect of how do you get that took some doing.
Come on, let's go get it.
When a story works, hopefully this does, it seems fairly invisible and straightforward, and you're using these things that just seem as though they're crafted for that moment. But they're actually setups for stuff that you wanted later. So as storytellers, we knew where we were going, and then we went backwards and said, how can we camouflage and disguise this setup so that you think It's just here for this particular moment of her saying, hey, you and I were friends. Here's a pin.
Yeah, and it like you said, it did sort of double duty and triple duty. Like on his journey on the Tepui, just being able to see that thing was just yet another reminder that she was along for the journey too. Just the house being up there and that grape soda top on his jacket was just yet another reminder of her. Look at those teeth. I love those big, giant kid teeth. You know, my kids are like that, you know, where they're just young enough that their big teeth have grown in. And, you know.
She's lost her front two teeth.
Yep.
The adult, one of them has come in. The other one's still missing. And then there's kids' teeth on the side.
Yeah. She's so appealing.
What are you going to say?
I forget, because I'm just really enjoying. Yeah, my kids have that big one giant tooth, you know, like that, you know. But I think she's just really successful as far as being appealing. It's wonderful.
Yeah, all down the line. The design of the film, of course, was inspired by, it grew out of the story, and you have this film where a house floats with balloons into the sky. You know that it needs to have a certain amount of whimsy to believe in it. And out of that grew these ideas of caricature, and as Ricky Nirva, the production designer, says, chunkification. So the proportions are very, very pushed and caricatured. The thickness of cloth, like if you look at her pants, at Ellie's pants or overalls, it's really quite thick, but that all kind of fits in with the general design. We also wanted Carl's house to feel small, cozy, and intimate. And then the flip side of that, the other extreme, is when he goes to Paradise Falls and he looks out over this amazing vista. And for anyone who's ever stood at the Grand Canyon or seen these amazing, wonderful natural sights, you know, if it looks like a model or you see like it's made out of styrofoam or something, it's not going to carry it. You know, it's not going to work. So we needed to have both of these extremes, a sense of caricature and simplicity, and yet the ability to go to these places that feel so believable and real that you can almost feel the wind in your face.
Wow.
So here we are in the sequence we call Married Life, and this was one of the sequences I was most worried about when it came to production, because between Bob, your original pitch, and the writing, and Ronnie and everybody else on the story team, their amazing storyboards, it just had this, it worked. You know, we put it up and people, even on boards, were brought to tears and very moved by this. And I thought, okay, if we can capture even, you know, 50 or 75% of what's working in the boards, it'll be a success. And I think in the end, they topped even the boards.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just really beautiful. Well, my general direction to the art crew and to lighting was this should feel as though it's Carl's memory of his life. You know, it's not that we're literally tracking along and following him, although we are, but it's kind of seen through his own memory of his life together with this amazing woman. And so it's seen a little maybe even more rosy and idyllic than it was at the time.
Yeah, I mean, there was talk of going sepia, wasn't there, with it? And I'm glad we didn't. I'm glad it ended up being, like you're saying, this stylized, colorful, memory-laden thing.
Married Life as a sequence, as we were talking about, started, it was kind of like your classic, you start with a really long letter, and you pare it down to what's just the most essential things. I forget who, there's some quote by somebody who says, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one. You know, it's that kind of idea that you start with all the information, you keep stripping away till just the bare minimum, and it's a whole life told in, you know, 4 or 5 minutes across this montage just set to music. This music here is written, of course, by Michael Giacchino, the great composer that we got to work with on the show. And it was one of the first things we hit in doing the music was finding Ellie's theme. You actually heard it earlier when we met Ellie as a little girl, and you'll hear it later as Carl looks through the adventure book and as he's an action hero. It's played out in all these different ways, and it was a way of keeping Ellie as a character alive through the film, which of course she's the driving force behind the whole movie. So it was one of the ways that we tried to keep her present. A beat we struggled with a lot, which was the sort of regret that it wasn't till late in his life Carl sort of remembered, oh my gosh, we wanted to go on this trip and we never had a chance, and how to show all that.
We also tried to blame it more on him,
Carl.
the things holding them back.
Because we
were
felt
his
it was
fault.
important for him to feel this guilt. you know?
Yeah, and it ended up not being that important. It was just, I think we just kept going back to, it's just that life got in the way.
Yeah.
Life got in the way.
Which happens to every one of us.
Right, and Carl's flaw is that he interpreted it as something he didn't do, but her wisdom was, no, you've done it. You lived an amazing life, and we hope it's clear that when she gives him that adventure book when she's in the hospital, it's saying, go home and look at this and look at the wonderful life, and then move ahead to the next chapter. And he doesn't see it until he's down in South America.
As we were designing the film, again, the idea of keeping Ellie alive, we thought, well, let's choose some elements in design that represent Ellie. And so she is represented by bright color, primarily magenta. You'll see magenta accents throughout the whole film. In fact, as she passes away and Carl goes into the house, you see the last little remnants of magenta fading away, and it becomes almost a black and white image at the very end. As she is gone, then Carl is left with more neutral, cool, shaded colors. Without Ellie, the color and the saturation in his life is gone. And when she passes away and you dissolve to the funeral home or to the church, it's actually the same church they got married in, the model, and then we dissolve directly to the house. It was another one of those just lost in a fog, trying to capture the feeling of, more than the reality, the feeling of what those moments are like. That sort of absence, the loss, just creates this sort of emptiness.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that he's got the balloon as he walks away, you know, it's really touching. You know, that we talk about talismans that we keep throughout the film, and one of them is that little blue balloon that you start with, just shows up throughout.
This was a very delicate scene to do. We've just come from a very emotional bit of the film where he's lost his wife, the love of his life. And now we get to a place where we want to allow people the permission to laugh, because this is supposed to be ultimately a comedy. So the easing back into that was really tricky. And that scene of him in bed really captured that, where he wakes up. We can see clearly that her side of the bed is empty. And then just based on his gruffness and the appearance out of nowhere of this cane and the cracking of the back and stuff, slowly kind of warms you up to feeling like, okay, I'm allowed to laugh now. That's why we went back and put Bran back in, because we felt like, all right, if people get a little chuckle out of that, then that's not bad.
Yeah, Bran's inherently funny, and I won't go into why. But the one cool thing is that there are some things that the art department was kind enough to put in some of these shots that were from our actual grandparents' house. And in that Bran shot, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, there's a plaque that says the Clock of Life, and that was in my grandparents' house growing up. I can still recite it because we'd sit there and we all as a family recite this poem, The Clock of Life, and we stuck it in there. And there's a few others like that. Like the number 18 on the house was my grandparents' house number, and there was a fisherman carved out of wood that they put in.
That's right.
Like, ended up being more like a Viking fisherman or something like that to pay homage to our Norwegian and Danish histories.
That's right. So here we reveal Carl's neighborhood and the change that's come about since he and Ellie first moved in. That was something we changed a couple times during the development as well. We started with this idea of Carl's house being in the middle of a mall, like you have, Dillard's over to one side and a Pop Hut or, whatever on the other side.
Oh, that's right. He had Disco Bowl, and there was Disco Bowl next door, and there was a big bowling pin with helium in it, and that's what he used to lift his house.
That's right.
Was the Disco Bowl bowling pin. And like at night, he'd go to sleep, and you just hear this thump, 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 and like, from the disco next door, and his bed would like move around the room and stuff like that. That's funny stuff. What are we, crazy?
I know, two funny articles. So, but actually where that took us was it felt a little bit familiar, like we'd seen that before, and it also felt like the threat was almost over. It felt like, well, if they've already built the mall and his house has survived, then what's the big deal? And so we came up with this concept of, and it's been borne out and echoed in many different places around the world, where you'll see this massive construction and this one remaining tiny little house with an old guy who refuses to sell even for millions and millions.
Yep. That's again that double duty thing where it gave us the idea that time has gone by. It's a way just to tell the audience, okay, now we're in in the present, and also that he's just a guy that will not let go of the past, and not, so you learn a little about his character just by the fact that he wouldn't sell.
Carl's neighborhood here is based on a shopping center not far from here in Emeryville, but it's prevalent everywhere, this idea of, I think it's kind of born out of Italian style or something. It's supposed to look like a bunch of different buildings all kind of stacked neatly together, but it's actually one big warehouse painted different colors, It's supposed to look warm and inviting, but it's kind of modern and cold, and we had very modern names like Laser Tan and Sushi Pronto and all this stuff that is staring across the street at Carl.
It's so different than what he grew up with.
Yeah.
And here's old Russell.
Yeah. Russell's first name initially was Lewis.
Right.
When we first wrote it. And then there's one of the films that Disney was doing had a Lewis character, and we thought, well, let's differentiate. So we looked around and came up with the name
So we changed
Russell.
it to Donald Duck.
Yeah. Russell seemed to work out better anyway, because it's sort of descriptive. What is that word? Onomatopoeic? That
I think it was more Sisyphusian than onomatopoeic, but go ahead. Don't get obsequious with me, mister.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Go ahead.
It sounds like the way Russell is as a character. He can't stop moving, and he's based on kind of a bunch of different things. One is story man and voice actor and amazing animator Pete Sohn, who is actually he did the first sequence on the film, which we'll talk about.
Storyboarded it, yeah.
And then he did a bunch of design work, and he did the scratch dialogue.
It's very funny, and he really set the tone for what we then later did with Jordan, who then made it his own and made it very believable, and we like how Jordan finished off the character.
Yeah.
He was fun to work with too. He was into judo and he was a kid. You'd look over and we would have him do something, and we'd look and talk to each other, look back, and he'd be climbing the baffle between things, and the baffle would almost fall over.
No.
But it was really fun to work with him. Right. It was great to work with Asner too, man. Ed Asner just was awesome. He enjoyed being there. He really wanted to work on this piece. He believed in the piece, and just as funny, told great stories in between. Oh, yeah. And that's one of the gifts of being in this job, is we get to work with these great actors that we grew up watching on TV. And here, you're from Minnesota, I'm from Ohio, and we're just sitting there like, hi, off the boat here, Ed Asner. Hello, Mr. Asner.
He would tease us, and you're like, you want what? He'd be very grouchy with us, but then he'd sort of wink, essentially, and
you two got spunk.
Yeah.
I hate spunk.
Yeah. Here, as Carl hits the guy on the head, this has been interesting to watch with an audience. People initially think we're joking. They laugh at the hit, but as soon as they see blood, which is not something I would necessarily want to do, but that works so well, it really tells people, hey, this is serious. Carl has crossed the line. The lighting and the contrast deliberately changes. If you go back and look at Intro Russell, it's very soft and warm, and now we really turn up the darks and the lights. The sunlight is a lot more piercing and intense, and it trying to echo Carl's emotional state. He's sort of worked up into this frenzy, seeing this precious object hit by this truck, and so we tried to mirror that visually as well. So we actually did quite a lot of research trying to find out how would an outside force be able to kick out someone who's he owns this house. Carl owns this house, and we played around a lot with the idea of eminent domain. And the challenge here, as with any legal thing, is to make it cinematically interesting and dramatic. And so we felt that it was very important that it not be just the outside world pushing him out, that Carl causes his own demise, that it's because of something he does. He crosses the line, he hits the guy on the head, and that's what gets him deemed as a public menace. Of course, realistically, if he were found to be a public menace, he'd probably be taken off immediately, but we sort of stretched that a little bit to give him one last night at home to pack up and get his things ready. In earlier reels, we had no indication at all that Carl was going to go up and float his house away, as opposed to go off with the nurses. And we played with, well, what if we planted these little clues that for the audience watching the second time, we could see, oh, he's getting the balloon cart out of the closet, or he's taking down the curtains to make these sails with. But for the first time audience, they would be in the dark as to what exactly he's doing. But it really didn't play, and I think people were confused and not really with Carl at that moment. And I think what we realized was that you want to see that moment, that he changes his mind, that he becomes determined to not just fade off into the distance, that he's going to take action. And so even though we don't know exactly what he's going to do, we see him cross his heart, we see him commit to doing something, which we'll see in the next sequence.
Morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Mr. Fredrickson.
The first sequence that was storyboarded on the film, and it's remarkably, this seems to happen a lot. The first sequence was boarded as almost shot for shot in the film. You know, Pete Zone, who also did the scratch for Russell, as we mentioned, boarded it and came up with these two characters. They were right there in his boards, and we noticed when we looked closely, George was one of the nurses, and the other guy's name tag said Nancy. We just sort of felt like that defines who that character is. He didn't even bother to look to see if it was his tag. He just grabbed some tag off the thing. And we came up with this whole backstory about how they behave. And the one guy's very fastidious and clean, and that's why he has those nice white sneakers. The other guy's wearing cowboy boots and a mullet. I think that's a Pixar first, by the way.
I think you're right.
And so there's a whole backstory that came by with those two guys.
There's a subtle burp that the cowboy had, or the Nancy does too at one point, right? Like he's been out too late the night before.
Yes.
I think he picked Nancy for the shirt just so that people would say something, and you know he could get in a fight with them because he.
Well, that's what makes great board artists. Is that, you know, all the guys on the film would do this. Just put in these little details that are very specific and unique, and make the world more rich. You know. That was again the sense that Pete was able to capture in his storyboards was this wonderful. You know, there's a lot of different choices you could have for what is this scene? You know, is it a heroic triumph over the guys who have been trying to steal his house, or is it a fleeing, you know, an escape, quick, hurried, get out of here before they catch me? And the choice we made was let's make it more just a waltz. It's a beautiful, poignant, sort of a poetic exit from the world and a reconnection with his wife, which is, of course, what ultimately he's after in going to the falls and in the first place, is to try to get his wife back or feel some connection. Officially, we have 10,297 balloons on the house. So as it floats up into the sky, that's what you're seeing there. Although there is tons of cheating going on. So depending on which shot you look at, there are either more or less. Actually, I don't think there's ever more, but there are certainly less. As you look through the film at some of the wide vista shots where the house is floating in the sky, if you saw all those balloons, it just becomes all these dots and visual noise. And so we caricatured them up to triple or quadruple the size of other shots. And you don't notice. It's one of the sort of stylistic cheats of the film. Whenever you see a balloon next to a character, next to something else you recognize, like the window or the chimney, we had to shrink it back down because you realize, geez, that thing is the size of, you know, 2 Carls all of a sudden. But when you see it just disconnected up on top of the house, we scaled it up just so that it would be visually a little bit simpler to look at this big canopy of balloons. One of the technical directors here did a calculation that you would need approximately 26.5 million balloons if you were going to do this for real. And he did say that that does not account for the weight of the balloons themselves or the strings. So it'd probably be even more than that. So if you guys are thinking about trying this at home, buy stock in a balloon company. We worked a lot on dynamics of the balloons. How do they move and bump into each other, know where each other are, as well as be able to behave with
wind.
Exactly. And that was something that existed. It was a system that existed, but in a much smaller scale. And we were asking for 10,000 balloons, so really had to expand on that. Of course, the look of each balloon as well. We've gotten a lot of comments when people see the film. They go, look, you can see right through the balloon. Like, well, yeah. It didn't seem like that big a deal to me, but apparently looks cool, so. Then, of course, individually, we wanted each balloon to look like a real balloon. We studied a lot of balloons. Of course, you see that great translucency, transparency, and things we found and we were able to capture in the film is at the beginning of their life, they're very clear and you can see through them. And then I don't know what happens, oxidation or what. They start to become more cloudy, and we were able to capture all that. And you see it progress over time, that as Carl first takes off, the balloons are much more vibrant and colorful. During the middle of Act 2, as the house starts to get weighed down and drag, the balloons get cloudy. They get less vibrant in terms of color. And then we just cheated them back up at the end. They're a reflection of Carl's emotional state. So as he takes off after Russell, the balloons become more colorful again, even though there's less of them and they're more raggedy.
Lost in time. You going to South America, Mr. Frederickson?
Don't touch that!
Russell's introduction into the house here, which we called the interruption, was one of the more difficult scenes to find, because we wanted to be very truthful about how would a kid react to being up in a floating house. And we thought, if he doesn't react emotionally in some way, like cry or have a fit or something, that seems truthful, that a kid would just freak out. He's separated from his mom, he's away from his neighborhood, and so on. And so we wrote this whole scene where he cried, and Carl tried to entertain him by riding him up and down on the electric the chair
old folks
thing.
assist
Yeah.
chair,
But in working with Jordan, the thing that was more truthful for him was to be more intellectually curious, and so we kind of reconstructed the scene around his performance and playing to his strengths.
Did you know that the cumulonimbus?
The scene where Carl lowers him out of the window came out of, I remember we were actually boarding a scene. We thought, okay, what's Carl going to do to get rid of this kid? He's going to do the most easy available thing. He doesn't want to cut all the balloons down and start over, so he's just going to lower the kid out on a string. And Jamie
Baker.
Jamie Baker was boarding it, and we came up with this idea of what if he accidentally, I think we were just goofing around, like he's lowering him on the string and he just drops him, or the string breaks or something. And then came up with the idea of what if Carl then wakes up and that was all kind of a dream. We're kind of messing with the audience a little bit, but it gets a huge, huge laugh. It's really fun. I don't know, I think we plugged the plot hole here. The idea was, how in the world would they end up in South America if Carl doesn't want to go there with this kid? And so we came up with this idea of there being a storm, some external force that forces them to continue. And
combined with the fact, the GPS and that Carl falls asleep, that's the 1-2 punch that you buy that they made it down there.
yeah,
So we also had to put in that Russell really knows where Carl's going. He's going to South America and all that stuff.
and that he himself is hungry for adventure. He's never been out of the city, so he's excited about this. He wants to go. The rocking of the house felt like, as soon as we came up with this concept of the floating house, we were brought to mind like the Charlie Chaplin and Laurel and Hardy sort of films on ships where they're eating soup and it's sliding back and forth kind of stuff. We thought it'd be great to play with. We had a scene where Carl just instinctively, oh, there's a storm, quick, get in the basement. And they ran to the door and they ran down the stairs, and there was no basement. They nearly fell out of the bottom. And quick, back upstairs, which was great.
It was great.
It just overstayed our welcome a little bit, and we had to cut it.
The other thing we were going to do was he woke up. It's like he's in this storm, da-da-da-da-da-da. He passes out. He wakes up in bed. He looks around, and it was all a dream.
Yeah.
All a dream. And then he goes over to the bathroom. He puts up a toilet, and there's like a seagull in there, and he looks down, and it's 10,000 feet down the pipe, and then the kid shows up. Hi, you fell asleep, and then he comes down and he's It's so funny, the things that have been in and out too, like this little GPS moment where he throws it, we put it in, and we had a huge debate on how competent to make Russell, and this also was hooked into his dad, that his dad gave him this GPS as a hint that Dad was to come. But we must have taken this in and out, 3, 4, 5 times, and
Kevin Nolting, our editor, hated us. Don't tell me, we're putting it back in. Okay.
And then you see it with an audience, and it gets good reaction. So it's like, phew, glad we put that one in.
Yeah. The crash here, this was another one of those. On every film, there are scenes that land very easily and quickly, and you only have to do minor adjustments on, and they're there. And then there's ones that go over and over and over, and this was a very difficult one. We called it Stuck, and we started to feel as though we named it.
Yeah, we were stuck.
On ourselves, curse on ourselves. Because, and of course, it ends up, hopefully this isn't apparent in the film, But this is where you lay down a ton of rules for the rest of the movie, right? This is a fairly complicated thing that they get thrown out of the house. They barely grab onto the garden hose to prevent it from floating away. The two of them anchor it down. If Russell lets go, it'll float away. They can't climb up. It's all this sort of exposition that we needed to get in, hopefully in an entertaining way. And that's where the climb up, etc. kind of gags came from, is just basically trying to lay down the rules for the audience of this is now going to be what you're seeing through the second act. This is why these two characters are harnessed to this house and where they're going. I wanted to design it as such that the falls are always out there. No matter where you are across the landscape, you can always look up and have an immediate judge of how far away, how much longer do we have to go, so that we don't have to talk about that. We can just show it. One of the big research things that we did on this film was looking into clouds. They're actually really tricky to do because they're not solid objects. You know, something like a coffee mug or even a toy or a person, relatively straightforward. The clouds are a bunch of small, tiny little particles that are kind of traveling in a big form. And so they're not without form, but they're kind of vaporous. And so that was a little tricky to pull off. The guys in effects did some fantastic work developing a way of making the clouds not only look like clouds, but have this great sort of movement to them. They were adjustable so that we could get both cumulonimbus, very distinct hard-edged clouds that you'll see. You could also dial it to be more wispy, more like cirrus clouds. So it was a very robust system that they came up with that you'll see throughout the film, as well as a bunch of great matte painting. Some of the clouds are painted, some of them are volumetric, which means, you know, you can actually see them turn in space. They're dimensional objects, and yet you can kind of see through them at times on the edges, and they really, they did a fantastic job. When we came up with the location for this film, we initially played around with some ideas of, well, let's set it on a tropical island, that the two of them get stuck on this island with no other people and no hope of rescue, and now the two of them have to deal with being stuck there and each other. And then we thought, well, that's been done a lot. We've seen a lot of movies where people are stuck on an island. Where else in the world could we go that they are completely outside of civilization? And Ralph Eggleston, who's an art director, a production designer here, had this video of these real-life places. And I'd never heard of them. Had you?
Nope, never heard of them.
So we looked at this documentary, and we were just amazed that first of all, these fantastic weird shapes actually exist in the real world, and that we'd never heard of them. And this is perfect, not only plot-wise for our characters to get stuck, but also felt it echoed who Carl is as a character. He's removed from the rest of the world, completely isolated for millions and millions of years. These in real life, you know, there's like 120 of these things, and some of them to this day have never been set foot on by people. So we made contact with the guy who made the documentary, and he actually led an expedition down there. And a bunch of us went down.
We actually did do that, didn't we?
It seems like a weird dream. One of the things we were trying to get throughout the film, and especially as we sort of dialed in on what Jordan was bringing to the role of Russell, were those real truthful sounding. They're not necessarily funny lines as written, but the way he performs them make them really funny. Like
goggles.
Yeah, exactly. Or that's going to take like 1 billion transfers to get back to my house. I mean, that was a line that you wrote, and we worked with them. Or even, you'll have all your TVs and clocks and stuff. No, it's all singular TV. You'll have all your TV and clocks and stuff. We wrote it that way, trying to sound more like a real kid, and then kind of worked it so it sounds natural, hopefully, but it's actually worked over. And we tried to get as much of that as we could. This line here of, we're going to play the quiet game, and Russell says, cool, my mom loves that game. You know, just all stuff that give you a little hint into his life, what's going on off screen when he's not with Carl. This sequence was added later in the film making process, and it was an attempt to kind of jumpstart things. We've now had a lot of exposition and kind of a slower pace, and we thought, okay, let's like throw a fastball here and suddenly introduce something the audience has no idea what they're like, am I still in the right movie? You know, so what's going on? Who are these guys? And hopefully make them sit forward a little bit and go, wow, okay, now there's something new has been added.
Well, you wonder how it's going to connect. How's this all going to connect to the guys we've seen?
These scenes that are filmed in the jungle, they take place in the jungle. All the foliage and everything was really great for making visual excuses for light. So all the stuff of characters in the light and other characters in shadow, this is mostly all cheated, depending on what we needed just to make things visually clear. But, you know, you can get away with it because of the visual complexity of things.
My elbow hurts and I have to go to the bathroom.
This brings up the subject of the bird. The bird, of course, ends up being a fairly central, almost like a, what's the Hitchcock term? The microfilm.
McGuffin.
The McGuffin, yes, exactly. The bird ends up being a little bit of a McGuffin in that it's both what Carl and Russell want and what Muntz want, and that's what places them at odds. And the dogs, of course, represent Muntz out in the field. They've been searching for this thing for a long time. And then Russell and Carl just stumble upon it. And in an earlier version, we had Russell as almost like Damocles and the lion. Is that how you say that?
Yeah,
Damocles?
I think so. Darnacles for the G-rated. But go ahead.
He finds
Androcles.
Androcles.
There
Is
you
it
go.
Androcles?
Yeah,
Okay.
Androcles.
The initial boards of this had Russell finding the bird in this big net, and Russell cuts him free, and out of gratitude, the bird won't stop following him and wants to save his life and all this sort of thing. And it all was played really well, but it also sort of complicated a little bit of the idea that Muntz hasn't found this thing for 50 years. Why today has he suddenly been able to capture the bird? So we actually went the opposite way and had him blaze past these traps, see how fast and evasive this thing is, and he can't be captured except by chocolate.
And then here's where the snipe setup comes into play.
Yeah.
Where he's drawn to see this. And this is pure Pete Docter right here. You could just hear kids yelling in the audience, "It's over there! The bird is over there!"
Now he's over there.
Want some more? Hi, boy. Don't eat it all. Come on out.
I was like the mislead here. For once the bird raises up behind him, you for a minute think, oh no, Russell's going to get eaten or something. And then we have this reverse shot of the bird coming into position. You think he's going to rip Carl's guts out, and then he's friendly.
And we're playing that police squad framing of the tall guy going off the top, you know?
The bird was one of the first things in the film.
Yep.
But
It was just Carl and Bird, and the bird was the very first incarnation of this.
Yeah,
and
before
just
we
the
even
two.
had Russell.
Russell or any of the dogs.
But it was one of the more difficult things to land in design. Not because the design itself is so difficult, although I think the guys did a great job with it, but his role in the film kept changing. Is he this ferocious link between birds and dinosaurs, which he was in one version? Is he a golden, feathered, magical, mythical creature? Is he, so we went through all these different designs based on the ever-changing needs in the story.
Yeah, and he has to be the monster of Paradise Falls, so you have to buy this giant bird.
Yep.
It can be interpreted just by its skeleton early on as a monster. It's all about what makes it worthy of Muntz going after it. And so we talked, like you said, we talked about making it valuable, like a phoenix or something like that. But then it ended up being more about that it's not inherently that valuable, but he's been wronged by being accused. Muntz is wrongly accused of fabricating this giant bird.
Get out
The bird, again, it was one of the first things that developed in the making of the story, and it was kind of, I was at the zoo with my kids, and I saw this weird crane thing, and it was just so hilarious how it's very puppet-like. The face didn't change hardly at all. I mean, the eye blinks, and that's it. But just based on little jerks in the head and movements, and it was very, I mean, we had a great time just watching it. You never quite knew what was going on in its head. It seemed really dumb and intelligent at the same time. And it was based on that sort of, I want to animate that sort of brought this bird character forward.
Kind of brings together puppeteering and animation. It's two of your big interests.
Well, and that thing of Carl going, go on, get out of here, and the bird mimicking him, that was all stuff that we just, I felt like, oh, that'll be a lot of fun to animate,
Yeah, you have to trust some of the stuff is, you storyboard and do dialogue and so forth, but like Russell climbing Carl to get up to the hose. Just you can't do that in boards, and you just have to trust that when you get to animation is going to be great.
The rock shapes you're seeing in the background, this is based on real life. As we were down in South America, we saw these weird windswept rock shapes that look like a turtle and a man. And when we got back, we were telling John Lasseter about that, and he said, you got to use that. So we retailored the scene to incorporate that into the film, and it worked out to be a very memorable introduction for Doug.
Oh, hello, sir. Thank goodness.
So the dog introduction, here we go with Doug. Doug was basically invented in another film that Bob and I had developed.
Right.
And that sort of didn't go anywhere. But one of the concepts that came out of that was this collar or some sort of mechanism that would interpret the thoughts of a character.
Yeah, and this is back in like 2004, you know, and it's like there was really nothing like that around. And I think the exciting thing for us was you get to hear his thoughts, but he acts like a normal dog. You know, he doesn't lip sync to the dialogue. And just the idea of hearing what a dog would be thinking, like, squirrel! You know, my dog does that all the time where he'll be just sort of, you know, relaxed, and all of a sudden, you know, he'll be panting, and then he'll stop and look and then relax back into it. The opening line for Doug, you know, I have just met you and I love you. That comes when I was a camp counselor back in Ohio in the late 50s. Now, when was it? It would have been in the 80s. I had a kid come up to me at the beginning of the week and say, "You are my counselor. I love you." And I just never forgot that. And just this little tiny kid, just the pure love of that, and it just felt like, well, that'd be a good line for Doug.
The other line I remember you coming up with, you were writing the sequence, and you came in one morning and said, I've got a great thing. They're walking through the fog, and they hear off in the distance, I can smell you. And I was like, that is the weirdest thing. That will never work. That's what? And luckily, we went ahead and did it, and Bob was absolutely right. It's one of those weird, quirky things that just, you know, what's funny is it almost gets a bigger laugh from people who have seen it once already.
I think so, too. I think people don't quite know what to do with it the first time around. Just, they have your reaction, which is, what the boop?
Doug is a great character, though. He's, like Bob was saying, he's based on real dog observations. I mean, we do this all the time, both of us, everybody who has pets, I think. You sit there and you watch them, and you make up what they're saying. Are you going to eat that? You know, kind of stuff. Or you know, whatever it is. And it was kind of out of that inspiration that all the dogs were born. Well, I was going to say one other thing about the talking dog voices. Oh, well, Bob, you and I have both talked about the hours of amusement as children, taking a 33.5 LP and cranking it up to 45 or 78. Now all the kids listening are going, what are they talking about? But, okay, well, you know, the records, you'd speed it up, and it would sound like that's basically how they did Alvin and the Chipmunks. That was hours of entertainment for me, and that's basically what we're doing now.
We're laughing at a high voice.
Yeah, hilarious.
The dialogue for these dogs started off as kind of bad Japanese anime English translation that we laid in.
Godzilla or something.
Godzilla, and you know that's been done a lot, and so we realized that's been done a lot, and so we were gonna
but
cut
it was
it out.
based off the idea that they have collars that translate their thoughts. It made sense.
And I love just stilted dialogue that, you know, that sort of, I will now go there, you will see that I will, you know, that sort of stuff. And but then we had the thought to bang one of these collars and put it up high, you know, so that Alpha's voice sounds like he's on helium or something. And that again, it was in and out.
Well, yeah, we played it and we were like, wah, wah, that's great, but it's way too weird. We got to get rid of that. There's so many weird things in this movie already. And we actually had cut it out, and Corey Ray, who was producing the film at that time, came in, and she's like, where are the talking dogs with the high voices? Where are the high voices? You got to put them back. That's hilarious. And we did, thankfully.
Yeah, and you know, we just got to trust that that's a weird idea, but we were going with it just as I don't know, the Munchkins ended up being kind of an interesting idea or sort of an oddball idea in Wizard of Oz. You know, you start in this more normal place and then you go to this fantastical place. And once he lifts his house up with those balloons, you know, we're going with the idea that, you know, there's license to do some fun, weird stuff out in this Tepui.
Well, and that, too, is part of the reason why we went so emotional and somber and heavy at times in their life together. We wanted to show this rich ups and downs of a real life, and it's based on that foundation that you can get to this kind of wacky place. You know, that I think without that, you don't really have much weight to the film, and so that's why we went as serious as we did at times during that montage.
Yeah, we're just hoping that it would then feed this whole last part of the film. Just why is he so driven to do this? You know, he didn't have to do this journey.
Bert! Bert!
This is another example, just how much animation brings to these proceedings. You know, just these gags right here are really just inventive and fun, and it's hard to storyboard some of that.
So just jumping ahead a little bit to where Russell builds the tent, sometimes restrictions are your friend. On boards, we had boarded the scene of him building the tent, and he says, "That's for you," and you look over, and in one frame it goes, poof, collapses to nothing. And it only was funny when it was super fast. And when we did that in the real life of computer, it looked fake. It looked weird. And so we were looking for other ways to get the same humor that we got out of that collapse, but in another way that was working with the restrictions we had. And in some cases, those end up really forcing your brain to go somewhere where you might not have otherwise.
This started in a cave. The two of them were in a cave looking out, and in an effort to remind us that Ellie's along for this journey, we took the cave away and added that shot of the house sort of protecting Carl, where the rain is hitting in kind of a square around him. Just yet another in a series of things just to sort of keep Ellie alive as we went.
Yeah, we wanted to get her almost like another character, a fourth character, a fifth character, I guess, her presence through the journey. And we did that through the badge, through the house, through the music.
Him
Giacchino.
talking to the house.
Yep. Yeah, Giacchino wrote this. It was one of the first things we did in working with him I really wanted to make sure we would nail those emotional bits. So he wrote Ellie's theme, which is used now when we introduce the character. It's used throughout and exclusively with nothing else during their life together, the married life sequence. And then it's placed just strategically through the film here and through action at the end. You know, you get that same theme played in these different ways as a way of reminding us emotionally about this character.
Phyllis told me I bug him too much.
We were deliberately a little ambiguous about Russell's home situation. We don't know whether their parents are separated or if he's just off on business a lot. But it doesn't really matter ultimately, and I think that's more real, that Carl wouldn't pry in and say, "Is your dad gone? Is he, what's going on?" You know, he didn't want to know this information. And so we know enough that Russell's dad is kind of an absentee dad, and that's something that Carl can fill.
So he can show me about tents then, right?
When we started the film, talking with Tom Myers, who's the sound designer on the film, we just kept emphasizing the idea of keeping it simple. Something that computers tend to, I think, because of the level of complexity to things, they tend to ask for a lot of detail, both visually and then sound-wise. You know, it's very easy you can look anywhere in the frame and see stuff that is so specific and detailed, and there's a tendency to want to add a sound for those things and make it feel tactile and real. But when you go back and look at the great animated films in the 40s and 50s, it's pretty striking how few sounds there are. If you look at Alice in Wonderland, it's amazing how little there is there. And I think using sound to really direct the eye, it's pretty cool. Like, you can have a big field full of cats and dogs and mice or whatever, and if there's one sound that fits one of the characters, your eye goes to it. It's another way of directing the eye. And so you know, talking with Tom, we were just saying, let's keep it as simple as we can. And he came up with the idea of maybe doing quite a bit less than we have in the past. And then when we need something, we pull it up and add it. And then even so, as we started Final Mix, as is typical, it's like the whole thing of writing a long letter first, you know, getting rid of everything that's not absolutely necessary, and finally arriving at a short letter. It was the same with sound, where we just pared back and simplified and reduced and pulled back and ended up with what I think is a really beautiful mix of the music and the sound. Both in the sound design and the music, we talked with both those guys, Giacchino and with Tom Myers, about trying to evoke classic films of the 50s and the 40s, you know. Not that we wanted it to sound like that, but we wanted it to be sort of inspired by that.
I think it grounds it too, you know,
Yeah.
since it is, again, a caricatured film. The music really grounds the film in reality.
I love how, you know, Michael Giacchino he didn't ever wink at the audience. You know, you have a scene like the dogs plotting to find where Doug is, and they've got these high squeaky voices, and yet the music is telling you these guys are serious. They're like, you know, cops or detective agents. You know, the music is taking it totally seriously, which to me makes it all the more funny.
Yeah, the music is the Margaret Dumont to the Muntz brothers, you know.
Yeah.
This is also one of the things that early on I thought worked for Doug pretty well. This idea of trying to fend off Alpha, but I think overall the thing that we were trying to get the balance of is, you know, the dogs can talk. You have a high-pitched voice collar, but then you wanted the meat and the teeth of these dogs so that there felt like a real threat. So we were trying to make sure that enough of that was there with Alpha, you know, and just his designs really helped that, just how strong he is.
We also went, not really overboard, but we overcompensated for any sort of defanging we did with Alpha by making Beta this really, not only physically strong, but as a voice. You know, you got Delroy doing the voice, and you listen to that guy when he talks, you know.
We're going to the fall.
This whole transition came about. It was kind of not working really well. It was feeling a little draggy and laborious. And Michael Giacchino, had seen an earlier reel, and he said, "Oh, I really want to do some like dramatic music that builds and comes to this really almost like King Kong, where it's boom, 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 really percussive and stuff." And that was sort of that idea that made us go back and look at the transition from that last sequence into Muntz's Lair.
Right, and Muntz's Lair itself. Every time we do one of these movies, we have really one sequence that gives us the most trouble. And on Monsters, Inc., it was Yeti's Cave. We just couldn't get that cave right. And on this one, it was Muntz's Lair. And we've talked about this before, but we did a lot of different drafts of this. And
we got to stop setting things in caves, I think.
But there's a lot to juggle here as far as how much does Muntz know about Carl, you know, his journey, keeping Muntz somewhat likable at the front end of this sequence, and yet keeping him tough and someone that you'd want to worry about as you grow into the sequence. So there's a lot to keep track of here.
The first draft of it that we had on boards was in a giant dirigible hangar.
Right,
Remember
that he had built down there.
Yeah. I don't remember where the idea exactly came from, but we kept referencing Mrs. Havisham, you know, that it's sort of a fading, crumbling tribute to the past, you know, that he was still stuck in the 30s in his head.
Right. You know, and Howard Hughes certainly came into our brain a little bit, just his obsession with flight and the things that he accomplished, you know, he just wouldn't back down. And so there's a little bit of Howard Hughes here, too.
There was a great scene where the dogs bring him in, and there's inexplicably this little section of living room set up in this massive hangar. So it's just empty. You hear this echoey music and drips coming from the broken windows on the top, and there's just this weird, surreal, completely bizarre thing. And then Muntz came out, and he was 30 years old.
Yeah, just looked like he'd been playing tennis, you know, right out of the 30s.
His dog's following him and everything.
Mm-hmm. And that version was a Fountain of Youth version, where the bird's egg was, and when you eat it, you essentially stay young forever. And it was great, but it ended up being just too hard to sort of work through the story.
Well, yeah, it was one of those things. I think a lot of the times you approach things based on what's interesting, either visually or just intellectually. And so that was incredibly interesting, and there was a lot of great material there. But then as you thought through it more, we realized this doesn't really play into Carl's thread. You know, his
Right.
theme is not about growing old or holding on to the past so much as we thought initially.
But that's right. I mean, it's not so much about trying to stay young or recapture his youth. It's more that he's trying to finish something that he started.
Right.
To feel closer to Ellie. And, you know, that goal is, you know, a misguided goal that he goes through this whole film. And that's where he seems to connect with Muntz, who's got this misguided goal to prove himself, you know, after he's had his career taken away from him.
I do not like the cone of shame.
Just as a side note, we had that line, you know, you want to come up into the blimp? And Carl says, would I? And every time we'd be in editorial with Kathy Ringgold, one of our editors, we'd always say, peg leg. Would I? Peg leg.
This is Muntz's trophy room. It's sort of a example of all the amazing things. He's like the symbol of adventure, you know, in the film. And so he's got this extremely rare stuff all around him. The Acinotherium, which is actually went extinct 15 million years ago. But we figured maybe there would be one left that he got. So that's the bone that the dog ends up chewing on. And of course, the giant Somalian leopard tortoise, we exaggerated. It's actually only about 3 or 4 feet wide, and we made it like 30, you know, but...
Again, I always crack up that he put 8 tons of bones in a lighter-than-air craft. You know,
well, you should have seen some of the first designs we had. We had like one of the heads from Easter Island, that massive
Yep, right.
thing. So
Right.
it doesn't feel like the blimp would be able to take off with all
Right,
that.
I know.
Well, dinner is served. Right this way.
One of the many reasons why this sequence was so difficult was, what is Muntz's motivation? Why has he been down here for 50 years looking for this bird? What is so important about that bird? And we tried tons of different things, making the bird itself rare, or a link to dinosaurs, or a whatever. And in the end, we kind of came around to, well, maybe it's more Muntz. What if it's less about the bird and more about his own sense of ego and importance?
His pride at who he was. And it's silly that he did all this, because he would have kept going as the famous Charles Muntz had he stayed. I think the world loved him back then.
Yeah.
But this is one of the tough things that we always have to face, is these really tough choices of things that really work well, that are great and fun, but somehow they bring the story down in some way, and you just have to, you know, get rid of them, which is not easy. We had a whole birthday cake sequence, remember that, where the dogs brought in a cake filled with like 100 candles, and so it's really...
And they all sang. It was great.
Yeah, and as
Very
Carl
funny.
and Russell left, they all got really quiet, you know, and it was this really tense moment as they left.
And then some of the board artists, Jamie Baker, had boarded the sequence of the dogs cutting the cake and serving it, and it was just so funny. It's one of those things where you're sort of cursed when you find these great entertaining bits, because then you can't let go of them. They're so cool, you know. But in the end, we of course had to, just to make things work.
The other cool thing I think about, maybe you're about to get this, Pete, but one of the cool things about this blimp is it does trace Muntz's history from when he begins, you know, that guy back in the 30s collecting all this stuff, and then as the deeper you go, the more it sort of mimics sort of how crazy he's gotten, all the way to the end, where he's got these charts and lines, and, you know, you can tell he's gone over the end a little bit.
Yep. Most of this silverware and place settings we stole from Ratatouille. I think the what Muntz and Carl are having, it's a seared scallop that was served in Ratatouille somewhere. There's actually a skull on the wall in the back behind Muntz, and I think it's duplicated again later in the fight. It's actually Gazer Beam's skull from The Incredibles.
It's the digital tar pits, as they call it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we always had this idea that there would be the digital backlot. You'd build something once, and it would be good anytime you want it. You could just grab it. Of course, the reality is all this stuff, even though it was used before, we had to import it and reshade it and relight it, because we're constantly redoing the system, the rendering and lighting and things. So.
And also sometimes those things don't match the caricature and the style,
Yeah. So I was going to talk quick just about lighting. When they first walk in to have dinner, I talked about this rich candlelight that feels more like a romantic dinner at a fine restaurant. And the light reaches further back, so it's got this warm sort of ambient glow to it. And then as Muntz walks towards the bird, we started to narrow in the focus, so there's a lot more dramatic lights and darks. So it's the same lighting, but we're kind of increasing the contrast for effect, and it really worked out well. The other thing I love lighting-wise is when he starts to walk forward here after the helmets, he says, the boy's right, you didn't have dessert. He steps out of the warm light into this blue light, and it just like, whoa, it really makes me, my hair stand on end. And it's not something that hopefully people are even too conscious of, but it's the turn for Muntz. No longer is he just pretending to be a nice host. He's now after this bird, and he's not going to stop at anything to get it. This is kind of a cool, we've had a lot of scenes where not a lot of action happens, and this had this whole sequence here where it's just a lot of talking. And so now we run into this action sequence, which hopefully kicks the energy up through the film as Carl and Russell try to escape from Muntz.
At one point, we just had them running out of the front of the cave, going from there, but then the story guys came up with the idea of the side tunnel, which is nice the way that it dumps out into the light there, you know, and it gives us an excuse to sort of punish Carl's house a little bit for, you know, not going to the falls. It's like he's now, you can tell now he's going right to left on screen, and that just signifies that he's going away from his goal always. And so in doing so, he's taking upon himself to help Russell and the bird, and the house gets a little bit of damage.
We also took advantage, finally, of this neutral buoyancy idea that Carl and Russell, when they're tied to the house, they have almost just enough gravity to keep them down. And so when they're jumping down the rocks, they're able to leap like astronauts, you know. And we had a whole sequence at the beginning of the film when they first tied on. Remember that?
Yeah, that's when they first saw Paradise Falls. They were jumping around the very early one, and they went up over a rise and actually saw it. And I think you're talking about one that was the next one out, right? What was the next version of that?
Well, we had all this early animation experimentation where it just seemed like such fun, and really taking advantage of the specificity of being tied to this bunch of balloons that's going to pull them up skyward. But at the beginning of the film, it felt like we were stalling out. Like, okay, you've set your goals down, let's go. And instead, we're sitting here goofing around. And so we cut it out at that point, but found a lot of opportunity here in this sequence to take advantage of that. The cave is based on real, again, in real life, the Tepuis in South America had underground rivers that would leave these big hollowed out tubes. And since erosion happened, what used to be ground level is now like a half a mile up. And so there are these big tubes into the tabletop mountains, and that's what we kind of patterned these on.
It's not too far off, is it, a lot of this? It just pretty close to what we saw.
Yeah, I know.
In a caricatured way.
Spent a lot of time on those splashes as dogs. The effects of the river. Rivers, water's always very difficult, and dogs falling into the river and swimming and whatnot was kind of a big deal.
Anything organic like that is not that easy. So Carl checks his house. Is it okay? That's still his first concern. But we decided that the bird, it'd be okay maybe if the bird was injured here a little bit, just to sort of turn Carl toward helping it. Just that one last thing that he knew that bird wouldn't make it over without him. And so, again, this is Russell leading Carl off of his goal. It's like a big Y shape. He could either go on to the falls, or he could go with his new family that he's got, his new dog and his new grandkid and his new 10 million foot tall bird. And
yeah, we figured the only thing that would make him make that switch would be if he somehow caused an injury to one of them. And so that guilt is, as with all of us in life, a very motivating factor.
Yeah, in protecting his house, essentially, you know, the bird gets hurt.
So we have a quick cut back to Muntz here, and it was always a balance, and throughout the film was like, how much do we check in with Muntz once he's introduced? He comes in so late in the film that, you know, we didn't want to suddenly elevate him to an A position in terms of story, but you want to kind of know what he's up to, so we tried to keep it quick. and connects back to Doug. And it's just Doug sniffing, the sort of dog real-life sniffing always makes me laugh.
The hero is trying to kill us. What a joke.
Hey, I know a joke.
Hey, I know a joke. That joke was actually written for a different sequence, Bob. You wrote it for a different part of the movie.
We find out that the bird has babies over in the twisty rocks, and Carl was standing there, and Doug was just bothering him, standing beside him, sort of throwing him off. And, you know, at that point, Doug was a little bit more interested in getting the bird back to his master than we ended up with. But yeah, it was there. And then we added it to this sequence as sort of the opener, and then it fell out for a while, and then it came back in at the last minute, you know.
Yeah, it wasn't in a version. We had a general audience preview screening, and we showed the whole film. About half of it was animated. The rest was still on storyboards. And there was a lot of rustling at this moment because you just come from this big action, and then you go to this quiet walk. And we put the joke back in as a way of kind of keeping the entertainment value going.
And it also gives Carl the ability to have still a little bit more of a push away against Doug. He rolls his eyes, sort of shows that he hasn't quite tied in yet to the goal of Russell. He hasn't bought into this new family quite yet. That's coming up.
It was interesting. We actually originally animated it just like he was listening already to Russell, like, gee, this boy speaks wisdom, you know.
That's right.
But then there was kind of no contrast, and you didn't really get the moment when he says the boring stuff, which seems to be a key line, you know?
Yeah.
It really resonates.
That then is a vector right out to when he's looking at the Paradise Falls adventure book, that the small things in life are the adventures.
So we actually went back to that earlier scene and had him play opposite that. So Carl is rolling his eyes going, oh, brother, you know, and then when he says the boring stuff, then you get a nice change, and that's, of course, what makes you register that.
That's it! Go, Kevin! Go find your baby! Run, Kevin, run!
We originally wrote this as more of a standoff moment between Carl and Russell. Carl and Muntz.
Whoever.
So Carl has the bird, and he's about to cut it free, and Muntz says, stop. You know, basically, I've got your house, and I'm going to smash it or set it on fire or whatever, unless you give me the bird. And Carl had a chance to stop and look at the bird and look at the house, and finally he couldn't choose, and he went for the house.
And then Muntz got the book out and was saying, well, let's see your wife's book. You're interested in going to Paradise Falls. And that started getting to Carl.
Yeah, trying to really poke at his sensitive spots. Huh?
Yeah.
But then that ended up, A, going on a little bit long, but also, B, making Carl unlikable. By this time, we as the audience have started to care about this bird and want it to get home. It's injured now. It has babies. It really needs our help.
So it really took that flame being lit under the house to make us buy that Carl would, you know, give it away.
And we also just ratcheted the thing up so that Muntz, he doesn't come in giving him any choice. He's just like, hand it over right now, or, you know, you're going to set your house on fire, which he does. One other thing that we had tried at one point was this idea that Carl's there with the bird, and suddenly his house moves forward, and Muntz steps out, and he's inside the house, and he has all of Carl's stuff, and he's paging through it. It's like this invasion of his private space, and it was a really kind of cool idea, but it ended up doing a number of things. One, it kind of went back into the house without Carl in a way that we were trying to preserve for the end here when he gets to Paradise Falls.
Yeah, the first time he goes back in is at the end of the journey, and that was different with that in there.
Yeah, and then also a lot of this stuff, you know, you try to balance between the emotion and the logic of it, and we're thinking, well, why would Muntz care about Carl's house? You know, he knows that Carl cares about it, and that's maybe enough, but somehow it didn't play.
Kudos to lighting on that sort of angry dawn that came up there is just great.
And that was something that Bob, you had written in the first draft of the script, and also coming up here, this idea of finally getting the house there, and it sort of breathes its last, you know, just kind of, and we worked on that.
Ronnie Del Carmen boarded this sequence amazingly. Just that sense of separation, you know, the line that he has been clipping onto his pack is going on by itself, and Ronnie really captured that well.
What I was going to talk about just briefly is the terrain. Of course, real life, if there was a waterfall, it would be all chewed up and rugged, and eroded, but we wanted this to feel flat and empty, you know, so that when Carl finally reaches his goal, in fact, we had ideas of from far off, this thing looks like, you know, heaven.
It's lush.
You know, it's like an
jungle.
oasis over there. And then you get there and it's all just dead and flat because it's a false goal.
We went for just as empty as we could be. The sound is really echoey and cavernous in this house, and it's the first time we've been back, and it's the first time we've gotten to look at just how disheveled things have gotten for Carl, and then he just slowly puts it back kind of the way it was, and we think, okay, he's made it, he's done his goal, and he'll be satisfied. But he isn't.
And so, yeah, of course, this is kind of like, if you think of the movie as a joke, as Andrew Stanton often talks about it, this is the punchline. You know, this is where Carl really turns and goes from a guy who's looking backwards and trying to hold on to these memories to now moving forward. And we basically play that through this sequence with no dialogue and using two props to sell that. One is, of course, the adventure book and this revelation that those pages are not blank. They're actually, you know, they're full of the adventure, but it's just a kind of a redefining of what he thought adventure meant. Carl thought that adventure was going to be travel and exotic animals and places, and instead it's everyday things of changing a tire and going on a picnic and
Just
things
being in
like
a
that.
relationship, you know, it's an adventure.
So we, of course, struggled with the logic of this quite a bit. And this is where it gets interesting. You know, as a storyteller, we had a lot of people saying, well, now, if that book's been around, wouldn't he have seen that already? You know, this is his wife's thing. It's a precious book. Wouldn't he have looked through it? You know, he would have looked through all of her things after she'd been gone. And that's probably true logically. But for the movie, it just works so well as a reveal of Carl's change that... and we tried to make more logic out of that it's been stuffed in a closet and he's forgotten
Yeah, we were going to
about
put a
it.
big ribbon around it that he's going to cut open, but I think the animation sells it so
Yeah.
well. You get it.
Yep. And then, of course, the other prop that we used is the sash, and that sort of represents Russell. And that at the end he picks it up. That means he's going to go. He accepts his wife's mission to go back and get into life again, which is, of course, what he needed to do from the beginning.
Just want to let you know I'm crying, even though we're not listening to the sound. I'm crying right now.
Well,
It's a very emotional movie, and you know, I think we didn't hold back, and I'm proud of us for that. You know, that this is just a life. We showed a life, and
Yeah.
how wonderful it is.
Yep.
Especially when you share it with someone.
There are some really key, just to that point, things that make this really emotional. I think Ronnie, when he was boarding this, was really smart. And so a lot of the compositions here are based on real photos of people from the 40s, from the 50s. And there's a real truth and an authenticity to that I think even as we've recreated them in the computer, they kind of come through and they speak through that. They're a little more casual and they're real. Ronnie, he ended up doing the handwriting of Ellie. Thanks for the adventure, now go have a new one. And some of the drawings in the book are actually my daughter's. And she drew for young Ellie, which, I don't know, it's one of the many things. I mean, these films, as you know, Bob, you were talking earlier about the clock of life being in the background. We put so much of our own stuff and our own experiences into these movies. They become very personal. And I think that hopefully they affect other people as much as they do us. But
Well, just the chairs. I mean, just that there's his chair and there's her chair. That just, they sit down together, watch TV dinners, just talk, read. That's something I absolutely remember growing up, is that here's grandpa's stuff, here's grandma's stuff. And, you know, and they're always right next to each other.
yeah.
I also love the lighting, how it went from when he first got in that room very desaturated, and you can just see as he picks up that sash, the color has crept back into that room. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and of course stuff like that's hard to do, and to track it across scenes and across potentially different lighters and things. But you know, J.C. Kalash and his team did a great job.
So he's cleaning house, man. This is going out. This is, you know.
Again, trying to make him show what's going on in his head with his external actions. You know, he's
Right.
cleaning out all those old things he's been holding on to that have been weighing him down, and now he's going off after Russell.
Yeah, at this point he realizes the house is just a house, and it's not Ellie, and the things aren't Ellie, and so the things that mean something to him now are his new family.
I've always really liked this visual of the two chairs sitting there. Even though Carl's gotten rid of all his stuff, he's still paying homage to Ellie. Russell goes off with the leaf blower here, and we initially had Russell going off with a bunch of balloons, which seemed much more poetically when he says, "I'm going to help Kevin even if you won't," and just you took it more seriously.
You somehow bought that he then hooked up with the dirigible, which was the problem. How could he steer up there? And so,
Well, that's what a number of people gave us notes.
Yeah.
Like, how is he going to catch up with that? The blimp goes like 60 miles an hour or more.
right, it left like the night before, and he's got to
Yeah.
catch up with it. The other thing that then we tried was the umbrella that he popped open. You know, he had a Wilderness Explorer umbrella, and
Yeah.
every time he did it, it's like, "Hello, I'm Russell Poppins." You know, I just didn't take it seriously.
Yeah. So, but then when we hit on the leaf blower idea, not only does it kind of get a laugh, which was not initially intended, but, you know, we take it. But then we also had to go back and set up the leaf blower because
Yeah.
otherwise it would feel like, well, wait, now where did that leaf blower come from? At
Right.
least that was the worry. So we went back to the beginning, and Carl uses it to clean his mailbox. And
We were going to duct tape it onto the back of the house when he first takes off, remember, as sort of a steering thing out his back door.
yeah.
And then, you know, so here's this beautiful sequence where Carl's house is taking off, and you hear, you know,
Yeah.
the whole time.
Which is kind of the problem here, too, where
Yeah.
he's like, "I'm going to help Kevin, even if you won't." You know, so at that point, you kind of want a little levity after all of the adventure book stuff. So now we get into the much anticipated third act, where Carl becomes an action adventure hero. You know, and we really tried in animation. We did a lot of work trying to make him progress. So he starts feeble, hunched over. He only takes small steps.
Carl does, right?
Carl, yeah. And as the film goes on, he becomes more and more robust. At the end here, he's, you know, Indiana Jones and
Essentially standing up straight.
name your action hero. You know, he's doing things that he has to save Russell. Much more physically agile than he was at the beginning.
I just want to say dirigibles are cool.
Well, yeah, doing the research for them was really awesome because there are some amazing, amazing pictures of the Hindenburg and the Graf Zeppelin, and these were like 800 feet long.
Yeah.
Crazy, huge things. And Muntz is, in real life, if you measure it, it's about a mile long, which is absurd. But it looks good when you have the house next to it. And there's a couple shots where we scaled it down or up or whatever, just like the balloons themselves, I think I mentioned earlier.
Some of the stuff I like in here is just using normal everyday objects in a new way, just like that hose. Here's this old guy's garden hose that he, you know, uses to water his plants, and now it's used as a grappling hook. And his cane, using his cane, and, you know, all that stuff now
false
takes
teeth.
on a new meaning for an action hero.
Yeah, we did. Bob, you're a big proponent of this too. It's just list making. You know, when we started this film, we made a list of all the things that old men have, and how could we use those in an action adventure way. We had this thing of jar of pills that he throws onto the ground and causes Muntz to slip, or
He tosses his he makes his hearing aid feedback and tosses it like a grenade. That's another one. we
yeah, the
tried.
dogs howl and run away,
Yeah.
and that was in for a long time.
Right. Just the idea of the old man fight was just something we wanted to see. You know, the idea of two guys, you know, battling it out with this great big adventure music behind them, but just that, you know, they're not spring chickens anymore, and their back sees up, and
Yeah.
that was in early on.
That was, and then it was out, and then it was back in, and you know, there was a real balance that we were trying to find between the comedy of it and the seriousness. That if you go through the whole movie and then you just make this a gag fest and don't take it seriously, that there's a danger of kind of losing people, and so it was a delicate balance. But I think in the end, I'm really glad we went and put all these gags in, because it makes it really funny and specific.
Yeah. Yep, specific to who these guys are.
You couldn't have Superman or Batman or whoever doing these kind of things. You know, it's these guys. For the dogs, we had designed specially Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Doug. So we had these 4 hero dogs that are going to do the majority of the work in the film. But then we knew we needed Muntz to have a big fleet of 50 dogs. And so rather than build 50 unique individual dogs, we built just a handful, and then varied the color, varied the fur, and
Just the height, the length of the limbs,
size.
eye color.
So we made this big kind of bingo chart with all the different dogs, and we would cast them per shot and figure out which dogs go where for enough variety and so on. And then there's an amazing team of people, the crowds group, that would take behavior generated by animators and plug them into these scenes where there'd be, 50, 30, whatever dogs running, avoiding obstacles, going up and down things, and pretty incredible stuff that they're able to do with this software called Massive.
It's, again, an example of technology sort of blending in. You'd never know it was there, that this idea of taking these behaviors and applying them to just automatically to a bunch of dogs. You don't notice it.
Yeah, in fact, some of the dogs are a mix, or some of the shots are a mix of this crowd's behavior mixed with some keyframe stuff for hero dogs. And yeah, you can't tell which is which in some scenes. I don't know how they muscled through some of these shots of dogs climbing over other dogs when Gamma gets the ball. I mean, it's just crazy amounts of complexity to these shots, and the scenes are just amazing.
Here we go with the old man fight. I
Yeah.
really like that Muntz starts destroying the things that are important to him too here with his
Yeah.
sword. Yeah, that's been there for a while. That idea of the tennis ball hitting the both of them.
Yeah. This is also cool, just symbolically, to geek out film school for a minute, is that Muntz is using a real sword. He's like a real action-adventure guy.
Right.
And Carl's just using his old man things, his cane, his false teeth.
Yep.
And the battle is definitely favoring Muntz at the beginning here.
And he's got the sash on. He's basically fighting for Russell.
Yep.
While he does this. Russell and the bird and Doug.
And now this is like, why would Muntz install a lever that makes the whole blip tilt sideways? I don't know.
Just don't touch that lever, dogs. Whatever you do. Here comes the big 3D money shot. Ah!
That was a cool moment. The story guys really helped build this whole third act. We'd written a bunch of beats, and we just gave it to them, and they fleshed out all these great ideas for action. This, of course, would be nearly impossible to do in real life, but it's what makes it exciting.
The lighting here is amazing, too. Just this cold steel gray as they go up. It sort of emphasizes how in trouble Carl is.
This was another example of, like in the boards, as Carl climbs up, we just had him go straight up, and it was scary enough just climbing this vertical side. But then when we had the real set, we realized, oh my gosh, the gondola is actually in set. He has to crawl almost upside down, which makes it even scarier. So we tried to take advantage of that with him slipping and whatnot.
We had a lot of things to juggle here. Just, Alpha's comeuppance and sort of Doug taking over the pack, essentially, interspersed with what Carl's doing. And meanwhile, Russell's out here. And, we knew that they'd all joined forces, but getting them there was a journey.
Yeah, the Kaka-Ra, of course, is something that we've set up through the film as the Wilderness Explorer call, and Carl always rolls his eyes. And we at one point actually had a line of dialogue where he says, "I don't need your help," several times. And so now here at the end that he's actually asking for it is meaningful. I think this sequence was one that, as it started out, it was like a half an hour long worth of material, which is generally the way we work, and then you cut down anything that's either not necessary or not funny, and you get hopefully to something that's jam-packed with goodness.
In the old days, we had someone yelling squirrel to Alpha was in the planes, and the dogs took off after an actual squirrel. There was an actual squirrel on the poor squirrel got chased by the planes, and then the planes wrecked. I like how Russell right here is becoming just more competent at what he does. He's flying the house, and he's becoming a true wilderness explorer.
This is kind of a strange echo of the film as they first arrived at the Tupui, of Carl chasing that hose and nearly losing it, but now instead of floating away up, it's going to fall down.
And also, he was chasing Ellie in the house, and now he's more about saving those guys in the house.
Yep. The ending here was another one where we experimented with a lot of different things, and we knew that elements that had to be involved were, of course, Muntz That house had to be an integral thing because we had a couple versions where the planes were involved and the house had fallen away already, and we knew the bird had to be in there, and so it was just a juggling act of all these different things, and how do you use them, We knew we wanted Carl to sacrifice that thing that's the most meaningful to him, is that house at the end, in favor of saving Russell and the bird. But how exactly that would happen we experimented with a lot.
And as usual, we found something and we worked backwards to it, the idea of everyone grabbing onto each other. We then installed earlier in the film as a setup for that.
Yep.
Ronnie Del Carmen, I believe, brought that forward.
And then we have Muntz, jumping off after them and missing, and we weren't initially very happy with that just because it felt like, okay, that's something we've seen elsewhere. So we played with a lot of different things again, one of them being that he got caught on a bunch of balloons and floated up and away, but they all felt very undefinite, that maybe Muntz were saving him for a sequel or something, and so we wanted it to feel definite that Muntz is gone, that he's not going to be a bother to the bird. And also, for me, it was very important to separate Muntz from the house, that as Carl looks down here and sees that house float away, that's his last goodbye. And so if Muntz is in there, you have this too many ideas, and it was emotionally not as clear. And hopefully by having the balloons and the strings there, it makes it somewhat unique.
It also felt like symbolically a little bit that, this sounds strange, but that Ellie was helping Carl a little bit, the balloons and the strings catching Muntz.
That was something that came out of that. As he jumps from the house and gets caught in the strings, it's almost like Ellie, like you say, reaching out and
saying,
and assisting.
Stop giving my man a hard time.
That's right. We battled here at the end, multiple endings, because basically as soon as Muntz is gone and Carl says it's just a house, the movie's over. He's come full circle. He knows now that Russell is the important thing, not the stuff he's been holding on to. He's still keeping Ellie alive, but he's moving forward.
He's honoring her, and then by moving forward.
Yeah. And that's, I like to think, you look at a lot of Capra films, that's probably where he would have ended the movie.
Yeah.
Da-da-da-da, the end,
Yeah.
And we wanted to wrap up and see what happens just a little bit to these guys.
In fact, I wanted Carl to say, "Attaboy, Clarence!"
Yeah.
But you wouldn't let me. All right, go ahead.
Well, we'd experimented with even cutting out this ceremony, but as Bob said, this is like Carl bringing the elixir back. So all the things he's learned, he's now going back, and we just get a hint that he's going to be okay,
And this Ellie badge is just reaches way back to the very first things we saw in the film, It's like she brought him in and befriended him, little Ellie did with Carl, and now he's doing the same thing with Russell.
We worked hard to make, even though this is a very public ceremony, we did everything we could in layout and in lighting to make this a very private moment between the two of them. We drop out any of the other guys in the periphery. The backgrounds just turn plain. The sound drops out. Everything just to emphasize how this is, in the midst of this public thing, a very private little moment.
I would like to award you the highest honor I can bestow. The Ellie badge.
Yeah, there's hope for the future. The two of them are just going to be pals and go through life.
Yep.
To our brand new senior wilderness explorers. Ready, everybody?
And I love the way this ending worked out. Is just ordinary, nothing. It's the point of the movie, right? That the things that matter the most are those things that just don't seem like anything at the time. Sitting in the curb counting cars, and then above them is this massive blimp.
Yeah.
And
in the handicap spot.
That's right. Hopefully get a laugh there. And then the ending here, again, played a lot with different things, but this really felt right, that it's whether it's literal or symbolic, that somehow Carl is able to finally get that house there, that he's finally lived that adventure. And he's done that by connecting with Russell.
You said it perfectly. That's why I like it too. It's the symbol of his new friendship. I don't even read it as literal. I just read it as he completed what he needed to do. That in reaching out to Russell, he did get the house to the falls. You said it better.
had this idea to use the adventure book now, not only to show people who made the movie, but also to kind of move on through the film, that you get to see, okay, little glimpses, little snapshots, literally, into Carl and Russell's life today and where they are and what they're doing. And again, it's a way of kind of hinting at things, and the audience can kind of imagine the scene themselves. You know, what was it like there with all those puppies running around in Carl's house at Shady Oaks? Or, you know, how did Carl do as a scout leader?
With his
stuff.
with his hose garters on and his shorts,
Yeah.
old man legs. I also like that these images reflect the credits, what people did, whether it be related to lighting or animation.
And then the string connecting up to the rest of the crawl. So, oh, we had a pretty amazing time making this movie. It was a really fun project, and I mean, starting from the very beginning, I feel so lucky to have had a chance to sit and work with Bob and just develop this together. You know, it was really something I looked forward to every day, coming into work and getting to work with you, Bob.
Me too.
It's a lot of fun.
Pete, you always look for the heart and entertainment and things, and we just had fun.
We did. And I think
Every day was fun.
We balanced each other really well, and, you know, Bob's got such funny stuff. I think, you know, the majority of the funny stuff in this movie is you, and the story crew is really great. I mean, I'm going to go into like every department now and talk about how great they are, but we've had the benefit of being at Pixar for a while now, and this is Pixar's 10th film. People have honed their craft to this point where every film comes out and I go, how are they going to do better than this, you know? The animator's just incredible, the lighting guys, everybody, the design, everything is just so well done. We're such lucky guys to work with amazing, talented people that we have.
Well, I agree. No, and on this one especially, you could tell people liked it, and they liked the characters. They really wanted to put themselves in here and make it work well.
This film was an interesting balance of the comedy and the really some pretty heavy emotional stuff of loss and things like that. And I think it ended up, for me anyway, that both are really important. You know, that you don't get genuine comedy without some pain, and the opposite as well. You know, it's all about the contrast, and it was a trick balancing those, but to me it works really well. So hopefully people like it. Is there anything else you wanted to?
Well, I mean, this is a long journey. You know, it's like we went on that journey to the Tepuis itself, but this whole project has been a journey. And, you know, I've said it before, and I know you feel this way too, Pete, that when you watch these movies again, you see memories of what happened on days, like a memory quilt.
Yeah.
You know, you remember when that idea came up, or who made that work, or the trouble we had with this. And essentially, it's a chronicle for me of just the wonderful journey we went on.
Yeah, a lot of people ask, what's it like for you watching these movies? And it's like you say, I don't really see the movie, I see the making of it, you know?
Yeah.
Which is what we've tried to do in doing this commentary, is give you a little background insight into what went into making this film. And
I think mainly just you just have to stay open as you go. You know, you try something and see if it works. If it doesn't, then you try something new, and you just show it to people and see what they think. And it's just that simple. You just try to be tenacious and make it the best you can.
yeah, and I think I may have talked about this earlier. When you see really successful films, they sort of propagate this myth of spontaneity, that somehow the movie leapt fully formed out of somebody's head. And the reality is, at least in our case, and I suspect with everybody, that it's a process, it's a discovery process. You start with something that you like, that you have a good feeling about, and you just keep going with that, and you add to it, and then you cut and prune, and you grow more, and then you cut and prune that. And in the end, hopefully, it has that sort of feeling that it was sprang fully formed out of somebody's brain. But the truth is that it was very much a discovery process along the way.
Yeah, and again, I think it helped that we like these characters.
Yeah.
You know, we like Carl, and we like Russell and Doug, and We just liked the story we were telling and wanted it to be told the best way possible. But thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you.
It was fun.
It was
fun. Hate to see it end.